Hey guys, tonight we're going to drift together down narrow, damp medieval lanes where flickering torches sputter in iron brackets, casting hunched shadows on stone walls. Imagine the smell of mud and manure, the clatter of cartwheels on uneven cobbles, the soft murmur of distant prayers, and a hush that seems to swallow you whole. You're wrapped in your cloak against the chill, peering around corners where the science of the day waits in secretive, sometimes shifty forms. You probably won't survive this, between the plague, inquisitors, and quack doctors with bone saws. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander past crooked buildings, leaning together like gossiping old women, their thatched roofs dark with rain. Every step squelches in mud, the air rank with rotting straw and smoke from hearths burning damp wood. You breathe it in slowly, because there's no choice, and hear the distant toll of a bell marking the hour. But who's counting? Time's a luxury for most. You pause at a tiny apothecary window. Candles glow behind warped glass. You squint at shelves lined with misshapen bottles filled with suspiciously colored liquids. There's the sharp tang of vinegar and some unholy mixture that might be snake oil or actual snake. Science here isn't a clean, bright laboratory. It's a whispered promise in the dark. You hear a hushed voice bargaining for a powder to cure the melancholy, or something to help my neighbor see angels. Medieval science doesn't draw lines between chemistry, medicine, and outright magic. You move on. The cobbles are wet tonight. Rain drips from gutters onto your hood. Someone hawks phlegm into the gutter, adding their own contribution to the grand experiment of public health, which, at this point, is non-existent. Historians still argue whether this period should even be called the Dark Ages, given that so many ideas flickered into being under that darkness. But whatever you call it, knowledge doesn't spread like wildfire. It crawls like an old dog, limping from one monastery to another, tucked under a monk's robes. The local blacksmith's workshop hums with orange light. You peek in. Sparks fly from hammer and anvil. But look closer. He's not just making horseshoes. He's adjusting the design for an iron hinge that won't seize in the rain. Primitive engineering is everywhere if you know how to see it. The line between artisan and scientist is blurred. A bearded man shouts at his apprentice for dropping tongues into the coals. You hear a curse that would make your mother blush. But then he leans in, squinting at the metal's color, judging heat by eye. It's empirical, even if no one's writing a treatise on it. You trudge on. Another building yawns open. No sign, but inside, a herbalist sells bundles of dried roots. You hear whispered bargains for mandrake and henbane, both potent and feared. A woman clutches a cloth-wrapped bundle to her chest like it might bite. The herbalist says, in a voice just above a hiss, "Steep it, but no more than a finger's length of root." You wonder how many ignore the warning. Outside the town square is a churn of carts, livestock, and yelling. A friar preaches that the end is near. Next to him, a tooth puller demonstrates his art with a pair of iron pliers. He's wearing a blood-spattered smock, because even in medieval PR, you want your audience to know you mean business. Your feet crunch over straw meant to soak up the worst of the mess. The friar and the tooth puller are both, in their way, scientists. One making claims about cosmology and salvation, the other testing human tolerance for pain and infection rates. You lean against a wall, exhausted. The smell of roasting meat wafts from a nearby stall. You close your eyes for a moment. There's a fine line here between progress and disaster. Someone nearby talks about a cousin who went to the university. The word carries weight. University. Not everyone knows what it is. Fewer still will ever see it. But you open your eyes and listen. Universities are new. They're popping up in Bologna, Paris, Oxford. Places where men in robes argue about Aristotle and Galen, often in Latin so no one else can eavesdrop. They debate whether the moon affects tides or if humors control personality. Sometimes they just argue because it's fun. Did you know in some towns, students carried clubs to brawl with locals? Quirky student traditions were the rage even then. Historians still argue whether medieval students were mostly scholars or drunken hooligans. Probably both. You shift your weight. There's something alive in these streets, under the grime. Curiosity, relentless and defiant. Even the superstitious fear of witchcraft can't smother it entirely. You see a boy poking at a dead rat with a stick. Morbid, sure, but also an experiment. How long has it been dead? Why is it so bloated? Across the way, a group of older men talk about the plague. Their hushed tones don't hide their fear. One swears he heard of a doctor who could stop it with vinegar and onions. Another snorts that only God decides. A third just prays under his breath. You slip past them, hugging your cloak tighter. Even in their fear, you hear questions. Why does it strike some and not others? Why does it spare children or kill them faster? No one knows. But some want to know. And that is the seed of science. You turn into a narrower lane, more shadows than light. A cat darts away. You nearly step on something you don't want to identify. A door opens briefly, spilling laughter and music onto the street. Inside, a tavern full of people drinking away fear, telling tall tales about alchemists who turn lead to gold and old women who fly on broomsticks. There's a smell of cheap ale and unwashed bodies. But ideas get traded here too, sloppy and half-formed. I heard in the East they have water that burns, someone slurs. Meaning alcohol, most likely. Or maybe Greek fire. Depends how many drinks in they are. You close your eyes again, letting the sound wash over you. Science is born in places like this as much as in royal courts. No polished marble halls here, just sticky floors. Outside you hear the bell toll again. Maybe it's midnight. Maybe later. Who knows? You keep walking. A man sleeps in the gutter, snoring loudly. A woman leans in a doorway, hawking more than herbs. The world keeps moving, dirty, lively, and always on the brink of discovering something new. It's not the clean, linear progress you learned about in school. It's messy, painful, frequently tragic. But it's there. Science in the medieval world is a contradiction, like a candle in a drafty room, always at risk of going out, but enough to show you the next step. You keep walking, feet sore, eyes heavy, following that frail, flickering light. You slip around a corner into a tighter, darker lane. The walls lean in so close you can touch them both at once, their damp stones slick beneath your palms. The air here is thick with smoke and the sour tang of fermenting waste. You wrinkle your nose and keep going, drawn by a flickering glow ahead. A workshop door ajar, orange firelight licking the cobbles outside like a warning. Inside, you see them. Alchemists hunched over battered tables. They speak in low tones, arguing over recipes scrawled in cramped Latin on scraps of parchment. You press your ear to the door, careful not to disturb them. It's chaos in there. Vials clink, powders hiss on coals, a pot bubbles over with greenish froth. One man fans it desperately with his hat, cursing softly while another just laughs and takes notes. There's no standard procedure here, just trial, error, and a lot of prayers to St. Albertus Magnus. You watch the smoke curl up to the rafters. The smell is eye-watering, a sharp mix of sulfur, vinegar, and something you're pretty sure is rotten eggs. You choke quietly, trying not to laugh at yourself. This is the birthplace of chemistry, you remind yourself. You'd think it would be cleaner. One alchemist holds up a nugget of dull metal, rolling it between his fingers, eyes shining. It will be gold. It will, he insists, voice cracked from too many hours talking to no one but his furnace. His friend sighs but doesn't argue. After all, they need patrons, and selling hope is part of the job. Historians still argue whether most alchemists believed in their own hype, or just scammed rich nobles. Probably both, you think, watching one carefully cork a vial of bright red powder and label it with an elaborate flourish, likely hoping it'll fetch a better price at market. You edge closer to the door. A massive tome lies open on the table, its pages covered in symbols. Circles within circles, cryptic characters, and alchemical glyphs that might as well be runes from an alien language. You try to decipher them but quickly give up. Even in their time, many alchemists loved the mystery. It made them look smarter, and kept their secrets safe. Someone drops a hot crucible with a metallic clang and yells in pain. You jump. The others rush to help, muttering complaints about wasting precious ingredients. It's easy to see the constant danger. Fires, fumes, exploding glassware. No gloves, no goggles, no OSHA posters on the wall. You inhale, deeply this time. The reek is stomach-churning, but fascinating. A mix of burned lead, melted tin, and herbs meant to purify the result. The alchemists here don't care about modern chemistry's divisions. Medicine, metallurgy, philosophy, magic, it's all one big stew. You spot a small cage in the corner. A rat squeaks inside, its eyes reflecting the firelight. One alchemist drops a crumb in, watching it nibble. He jots notes on its behavior. Maybe it's for a test of poison, or a cure, or both. Medieval ethics were more about results than consent forms. You lean back, grateful you're only a visitor in this time. You'd hate to be an apprentice here. No dental plan, and you'd probably end up with a lungful of arsenic. Still, there's something mesmerizing about it all. The raw hope, the stubborn belief that nature's secrets can be forced into the open. Even if you blow yourself up trying. You hear one alchemist speak reverently of the emerald tablet, as above, so below. They think the entire universe is connected, that changing lead to gold is the same as purifying the soul. This isn't just greed, it's a spiritual quest in their eyes. Of course, they'd also happily sell you a potion to make your wife more obedient. Moral flexibility seems to be a job requirement. Outside, you hear a clanging bell and realize it's the curfew watch. Time to snuff candles and pretend you're not conspiring with demons. You watch them scramble to douse flames, sweep up powders, hide suspect books. Church authorities don't take kindly to unnatural arts unless they need a new pigment for illuminated manuscripts. You stifle a laugh. The hypocrisy is strong with these guys. One alchemist mutters about a rival who was arrested last week. They're worried the Inquisition might pay them a visit next. Another scoffs that their recipes are too worthless for anyone to care. You're not sure if that's comforting. You slip away from the door, your shoes squelching in the damp street. The rain has picked up again, running in rivulets down your cloak. You don't mind, it covers your eavesdropping. As you walk, you pass another workshop, this one shuttered tight. A faint glow seeps through the cracks. Alchemists were secretive by nature, worried rivals would steal recipes, or worse, improve them. Remember that blacksmith from earlier? He might buy these alchemists' powders to make better alloys. It's not all gold-making fantasies. Some of their experiments work, producing stronger metals or dyes more vibrant than anyone had seen, even if they don't understand why. You pause at a drainage channel. A sluggish flow of water carries away the city's filth, bits of straw and refuse bobbing along. Somewhere in that murky soup might be runoff from the alchemist's lab, arsenic, lead, or mercury. Environmental regulations aren't coming for a few centuries. You keep moving, the wind biting now. Another joke for you. Why did the medieval alchemist cross the road? To convince the other side he had the philosopher's stone. Not your best, you admit, but you're tired. You step carefully over a sleeping drunk and glance up at the church spire looming above the city. Its bells toll, marking the hour, sounding judgment over everything below. The church both condemns and funds learning, depending on the mood. Historians still argue whether the church stifled scientific progress or simply directed it along certain paths. You figure it depends on which monk you ask. Some were busy burning heretics. Others were copying alchemical texts by candlelight. You turn down another lane, your lamp guttering in the wind. Ahead, you see the faint glow of another lab, this one in a wealthier part of town. Rich patrons pay for results. They want gold, eternal life, the secrets of the universe on a convenient scroll. Inside, you glimpse shelves lined with polished glassware, imported from Venice, no doubt. An alchemist carefully pours liquid from one vial to another, steady hands betraying years of practice. It's almost peaceful. You hear the faint crackle of coals, the sigh of bellows. He leans over the table, face bathed in warm light, murmuring to himself. A prayer or a calculation, maybe both. You see him smile just a little as the mixture turns the right color. Success, at least tonight. You move on, your eyelids drooping with the hour. The alchemist's whispers fade behind you, but you can't help wondering what dreams they'll chase tomorrow, and what disasters they'll cook up along the way. You drift from the smoky glow of alchemists' dens and step into a broader, noisier street. Rain slicks the cobbles underfoot. The air here is thick with a different scent. Boiled bandages, old blood, and harsh herbs trying and failing to cover the stench of too many bodies pressed together. You shiver, but curiosity pulls you closer. Ahead you see the red and white pole of a barber surgeon's shop, spinning lazily in the wind. It's a grim kind of invitation, but you can't resist. You push the door open and immediately regret it. The smell hits you first. Even the apothecaries from before would wrinkle their noses at this. Inside, the barber surgeon is wiping blood from his hands on a rag already soaked through. He flashes you a crooked grin that would be reassuring if not for the set of saws hanging behind him. He's equal parts barber, dentist, surgeon, and therapist, though he'd laugh at that last word. You hover by the door, trying not to gag. There's a man in the chair, pale and shaking, mumbling a prayer while the barber surgeon holds his jaw in a death grip. "Hold still," he says with forced cheer, before yanking a molar with a crack loud enough to make your teeth ache in sympathy. The man howls. The barber surgeon drops the tooth into a tin cup with a wet clink. He wipes sweat from his brow. "Next," he calls, with all the tenderness of a tavern bouncer. You can't help noticing the bloody bandages on the floor, the stained tools that look like they were last cleaned during the previous king's reign, and a cauldron bubbling away in the corner. He gestures proudly to it. "Boiling for sterility," he says, as if that solves everything. Historians still argue whether these practitioners were heroes bringing surgery to the masses, or butchers who spread more disease than they cured. It's not an easy question. They knew how to set bones, lance abscesses, even perform amputations that sometimes saved lives. But anesthesia? Germ theory? Forget it. He calls you over. You shake your head, backing away. But he's already explaining how bloodletting restores balance to the humors. "Too much black bile," he insists, tapping your temple. You can tell. You want to ask if he moonlights as a psychic. He pulls out a bowl with curved edges, designed to catch the blood as it drains from the patient's arm. You notice it's only been wiped with straw. So hygienic. You thank him politely and sidle toward the door. Outside, the wind feels clean by comparison. You gulp air. But you're not done yet. Further down the street, you spot a small booth where a healer sets out jars of honey salve and herbal compresses. She's older, with gnarled fingers and a shrewd eye that has seen generations of wounds. Her clinic is a plank balanced on two barrels. She beckons you over with a grin. Unlike the barber surgeon, she has no iron tools or fancy pole. Just knowledge handed down from mother to daughter, apprentice to master. She shows you a pot of greenish paste that smells of rosemary and garlic. "Good for infected cuts," she whispers. You lean in to smell, and it's surprisingly pleasant, though you're not volunteering to test it. Someone limps over with a bandaged foot. She unwraps it carefully, clucks her tongue, and applies the paste while murmuring about keeping it clean. You realize she's doing her best with what little she has. And honestly, her survival rates might rival the barber's. You ask about her recipes, and she snorts. "Secret," she says, but winks. She gestures to the hills outside town. Everything you need grows there. You see she's tucked little bundles of herbs in her apron. Sage, chamomile, something you don't recognize. It's practical magic. Nothing flashy, just knowledge passed through generations, with a bit of folklore sprinkled in for fun. Did you know some medieval doctors swore by amulets filled with dried toads to ward off illness? Quirky, sure, but people were desperate. You'd try anything if the plague was on your doorstep. You glance back at the barber surgeon's shop and shudder. She laughs at your face. "He's useful," she says. Just messy. You can't argue. You wander further. In the town square, another healer has set up shop. He's selling miracle cures in bottles labeled in scratchy Latin. He swears they'll fix gout, melancholy, impotence. Just don't ask for a refund. You watch someone buy one, clutching it like a holy relic. You lean on a wooden post, tired. Science here is raw, contradictory. Superstition mixed with real insight. These healers and surgeons might kill you or save you depending on luck, skill, and phase of the moon. Historians still argue whether medieval medicine was primitive or just different. After all, balancing humors seems silly now, but it was their framework. You work with what you have, even if it's wrong. And without microscopes, germ theory is a fairy tale no one's thought of yet. You keep moving. The street narrows again, turning muddy. A drunk man vomits in the gutter, swearing it was the barber's cure for stomach cramps. You sidestep it with grim humor. You hear a joke from a passerby. What's the difference between a surgeon and a butcher? The butcher has cleaner knives. You snort. Some things never change. You catch sight of a cart trundling by. It's piled with bandages, buckets, sawdust to soak up blood. The driver hawks his wares to the barber surgeons in town. They haggle over prices like fishmongers. You peer into another shop window. A student is watching his master demonstrate stitching on a pig's leg. Practice for real wounds. The student looks green but determined. You see the master's fingers tremble with age, but his stitches are sure. There's hope here, you realize. For all the gore and horror, these people are trying. They're learning. It's not pretty. It's not safe. But it's progress, in the most painful way possible. You leave them behind, the glow of lamps fading into the mist. Your feet ache from walking, your head spins with the memory of blood and herbs. But you can't deny it. You've seen science here, even if it's in a barber's rag and a healer's jar of paste. You pause, leaning against a damp wall. A cat meows and darts past you. You whisper goodnight to it, because why not? The night is deepening. The town is quieter now, save for the distant cries of someone who's had too much ale or too much surgery. You close your eyes for a moment, listening. The wind rustles the thatch roofs. Somewhere, a door bangs shut, and far off, a church bell tolls once, marking the hour. You breathe slowly. You've survived this part of the night. Barely. But there's more to see, more to learn. You push yourself off the wall, wipe the damp from your cloak, and keep going. The medieval world waits for you. You wander away from the blood-soaked barber-surgeon streets, pulling your cloak tighter against the chill. Ahead, the town seems quieter, the houses packed tighter, the air heavy with anticipation. You hear hushed voices arguing in Latin, punctuated by the scratch of quills on parchment. You creep closer. Through a warped wooden door, you find a small room crammed with scholars. Candles flicker in iron holders, throwing moving shadows on the walls inked with charts and symbols. The scholars huddle over rough wooden desks. One points at a diagram of the moon in the margin of an old manuscript, his voice urgent but low. You can smell the tallow smoke from the candles, mixed with damp parchment and human sweat. It's not glamorous, but it's here that astronomy is clawing its way forward. They argue about epicycles, deference, and the great Ptolemaic system. You catch snippets. The stars fixed upon a sphere, one insists. But then how do you explain retrograde motion? Another demands. You hide a grin. Historians still argue whether medieval scholars truly believed these models or simply used them as calculation tools. You watch one frustrated student toss down his quill. He's got ink on his fingers, which he tries to wipe on his robe, forgetting it's just as stained. You lean against the doorframe, imagining the sky outside. It's overcast tonight, but you can picture it. The stars cold and hard above you, the moon a distant coin, silent and unblinking. No telescopes yet, just keen eyes, strained vision, and a lot of educated guessing. You notice a rolled-up chart tied with twine. You edge closer to see the spidery Latin annotations marking phases of the moon, eclipses, predictions for next year. It's not superstition alone, it's real observation. You can almost respect them for trying. You hear a snort of laughter inside as one scholar quips about an old superstition that eclipses meant dragons were devouring the sun. Another corrects him primly. That's the older texts. We know better. You hide your smile. Progress, even slow, is still progress. A master stands, clearing his throat. The others hush. He points at a battered brass astrolabe, its edges dented and green with age. He moves its discs carefully, aligning the star pointers with practiced fingers. You see how it works. It's a medieval computer in brass, solving complex astronomical problems by sliding plates. He lectures in a voice both sleep-inducing and hypnotic, droning about declinations, equinoxes, and the need to adjust for the local horizon. You catch yourself nodding. It's late, your feet ache. Then you jolt as he raps the table sharply to make a point. He insists their model of the cosmos is perfect, a clockwork designed by God himself. You're tempted to argue, but you know better. They don't see contradiction in faith and science. For them, understanding the stars is understanding God's plan. A candle sputters, sending smoke curling upward, and you watch them all blink in the sudden dimness. Someone scrambles to relight it. You hear a joke about Lucifer, literally meaning bringer of light, which earns a scandalized gasp and then nervous laughter. You relax a bit. Even scholars need bad jokes. Did you know some medieval universities taught astrology right alongside astronomy? They'd chart your horoscope as seriously as your tax bill. In fact, kings often had court astrologers who decided auspicious days for battle or marriage. You hear one student grumble that a local noble wants his birth chart done for a hefty fee. He's annoyed but also delighted at the payment. You get the sense nothing changes. Students taking side gigs to pay tuition is eternal. You shift your weight. It's cramped in here. The walls are lined with books, real treasures. You can see titles in Latin and Greek, copied by hand. The paper is expensive, the ink faded in places. Margins are stuffed with personal notes, corrections, insults, alternative theories. You trail a finger along one shelf, feeling the embossed leather cracking under your touch. Knowledge here is hoarded like gold, and just as dangerous if used carelessly. Historians still argue whether these texts spread ideas or simply calcified old dogmas. After all, some scholars were stubborn. If Ptolemy said it, it's true, you hear one declare with an arrogance that makes you roll your eyes. But another shakes his head. He points out new observations that don't quite fit. He's cautious, almost apologetic, but you see it in his eyes, that spark of doubt. That's how revolutions start. You clear your throat softly. No one notices you. They're lost in argument. The master has fetched an armillary sphere, its interlocking rings creaking as he rotates them. It's beautiful in the candlelight, brass gleaming, throwing strange shadows on the cracked walls. You watch one student trace the ecliptic with a fingertip, lips moving in silent calculation. It's almost tender. You wonder if he dreams of the stars while he sleeps in a flea-ridden bed. You step away for a moment, needing air. Outside, the night is heavy, clouds blotting out the moon. The wind tugs at your cloak. You glance up anyway, imagining the constellations overhead. Orion, Taurus, Ursa Major, known even then. Farmers need to know when to plant, sailors need to navigate, and everyone wants to know their fate. There's a weird comfort in it. No matter how wrong they might be, they're trying to find order in the chaos. You lean against the wall, cold seeping through. From inside, you still hear arguing. One voice high and indignant, "Epicycles work, I'll prove it." Another muttering, "It's all wrong, but no one will listen." You want to tell them it'll be centuries before Copernicus and Galileo really shake things up, that their charts will be mocked as quaint curiosities. But you don't. Let them dream. You straighten up. Another gust rattles the shutters. You hear the bells tolling from the church tower. Midnight now, surely. Time doesn't stop, even for scholars. You take one last look through the crack in the door. The light flickers on their faces, lined and tired. Ink-stained fingers point at heavens they can barely see, and you smile, just a little, because even this cramped, smoky room is a seed. One that will grow, painfully, unevenly, into something grander. You turn your collar against the wind and keep walking. The street bends ahead, promising more secrets, more science, more messy, wonderful human ambition. Your feet crunch over fallen straw. Somewhere a dog barks once, then falls silent. You exhale, your breath steaming in the cold, and you keep going. Always going. You wander from the scholar's cramped room into the silence of the cloister. The wind dies here, muffled by high stone walls. Lantern light spills onto the worn flagstones, casting patient shadows of arches and columns. You pull your cloak tighter as you step carefully. boots clicking in the hush. Monks drift past in heavy habits, hoods drawn. Some don't notice you at all. Others nod with the barest flicker of curiosity. You nod back, trying to look pious. This is their world. Strict, quiet, filled with whispered prayers, and even more whispered questions. You spot one monk winding a rope around the great bell's clapper to keep it silent. He moves slowly, deliberately, the sound of the rope's fibers rasping in the cold air. Time is different here. It's measured in prayer hours and the drip of rain in the cloister's gutters. But you hear a fainter ticking. You pause. There, near the wall, you see a figure bent over a mechanism of wood and brass. A monk adjusts it carefully, squinting in the dim light. It's a water clock. You lean in. Water drips from one small pot to another, moving a float that tugs at a gear. The monk watches it like a hawk. He mutters about calibration, counting under his breath. Historians still argue whether these medieval timekeepers were accurate or glorified toys, but there's no doubt they cared about measuring time. Prayer schedules, labor hours, even when to ring the bell to wake the sleepy novices. The monk glances up, sees you watching, and offers a faint smile. "We need to know the hours," he murmurs. "God demands order." You nod solemnly, but can't help the grin tugging at your mouth. God and gear ratios. A holy union. He gestures to a worn parchment on the wall. Inked diagrams show designs for escapements, float weights. You see revisions layered on revisions. Ink has soaked through in places, creating Rorschach blots that look almost intentional. You lean closer. There's something beautiful about it. A mind grappling with the problem of time, trying to make the infinite measurable. A novice stumbles in, nearly knocking over the whole contraption. The older monk scolds him gently but firmly. You can't help laughing quietly. Monastic life is discipline, but even discipline has its slapstick moments. You hear a bell toll in another part of the monastery. The monk looks up, frowning. "Off by a minute," he mutters. He adjusts the water flow, his brow furrowed like a man solving a murder. You back away, leaving him to his obsession. Outside, the cloister garden is dark, but you smell the damp earth, the faint sweetness of crushed herbs underfoot. Monks grew their own medicine here. Rosemary, sage, lavender. You see the pale glint of leaves in moonlight. You wander along the covered walkway, listening to rain on tile. Ahead, another monk sits with a candle, copying a book. He doesn't look up. His quill scratches endlessly, dipping and scraping. Ink stains his fingers and sleeve. You recognize the text. Prayers, yes, but also diagrams of clockwork. Marginal notes argue about the length of pendulums, the weight needed for a consistent swing. He's recording experiments in the margins of Holy Scripture, sacred and profane knowledge on the same page. You stifle a chuckle. You're pretty sure the abbot wouldn't approve. You keep moving, the arches framing your path. A cat slinks past you, tail high. It pauses to regard you with glowing eyes before vanishing into the gloom. Further on, you hear a low chant rising from the chapel, voices weaving together, rising and falling like slow waves. You close your eyes and listen. This is time measured in music. Breath, pause, syllable. Another clock of sorts. Did you know medieval monks were among the first to notate music precisely? Quirky, isn't it? Devout men inventing the system so that generations later, someone could ruin Christmas with an off-key recorder solo. You let that thought amuse you as you slip into the side of the chapel. The light here is dim, the air thick with incense. Monks stand in rows, faces lost in shadow. Their chanting is hypnotic. You feel your own breathing slow to match the rhythm. You watch a monk with a small handbell. He raises it at precise intervals, marking the division of the hymn. Even here, there's a need to keep time. Historians still argue whether these communities preserved knowledge or trapped it. You see both sides. Without monasteries, many ancient texts would be lost. But they also guarded learning jealously, deciding who was worthy of it. You leave the chapel quietly, the chanting fading behind you. Outside, a monk greets you politely and asks if you're lost. You shake your head. He smiles. "Few wander at this hour," he says. You shrug and tell him you like the quiet. He gestures at the clock tower rising above the cloister. You crane your neck to see it, its dark shape etched against the cloud-choked sky. He tells you proudly they're perfecting the weights and gears. Soon, he says, it will ring on its own. You raise your brows. An automated bell? He nods, face glowing with anticipation. No more late prayers. You suppress a grin. He's serious about it, as though God might send a thunderbolt for tardiness. He wishes you good night and slips away, sandals whispering on stone. You continue your path, the ticking and dripping of timepieces echoing in your memory. You pass another chamber, its door ajar. Inside, you see a massive hourglass being turned carefully by two monks. Sand hisses through the glass neck, marking time in its slow, relentless way. One monk mutters that the sand clumps in damp weather. The other sighs. They discuss drying it over coals. You hide a smile. High-tech solutions in the 14th century. You move on, leaving them to their experiment. Ahead, you find a covered walkway opening onto the outer courtyard. The rain has stopped. Clouds part enough to show a sliver of moon. Its pale light shines on the cloister walls, slick with rain. You take a deep breath of the cold air. The scent of wettened moth and moss fills your nose. It's calming, even with the chill. You stand there, feeling the damp seep through your boots, and listen. Somewhere a wheel creaks. Somewhere water drips in a basin. Somewhere a monk snores behind a wall. Time moves differently here. Slower, deliberate. You think of the monk adjusting his water clock, so devoted to counting each minute precisely. You think of the chanting marking hours and syllables, the handbell in the chapel, the hourglass being turned carefully. It's all science. Early, crude, beautiful science. Trying to measure something that can't be held. You turn away at last, feet heavy, eyes half closed. The wind picks up again, pushing you gently toward the gate. You follow. Because there's more to see tonight. More wonders waiting in the dark. You slip through the monastery gate and back into the town's maze of narrow lanes, the wind at your back pushing you deeper into the medieval night. The quiet here is deceptive, just a breath held before the next secret spills out. You turn a corner and see a flicker of candlelight from a basement window. Curious, you crouch to peek. Below, in a cramped room thick with stale air, you see two figures hunched over a table. Shadows warp their faces. One carefully unrolls a scrap of parchment covered in strange symbols and shapes. The other stirs a small pot over a guttering candle, muttering to himself. You inhale slowly. The smell of vinegar and rotting onions wafts up. Lovely, they're making invisible ink. You watch, fascinated, as the man dips a quill into the noxious mixture and writes carefully on a piece of thin parchment. At first it looks blank. Then he warms it gently over the candle, and letters bloom like ghosts on the page. You grin. It's like a magic trick for spies. Did you know medieval courts were paranoid about secret messages? Quirky, but true. Diplomats and spies smuggled letters in hollowed-out shoe heels, in the seams of cloaks, or sewn into saddle linings. Your average medieval postman had no idea he was carrying threats of war, or proposals of marriage between rival kingdoms. You hear one of the men curse softly as the ink burns too hot and chars the parchment. His friend snorts. Again, he says, voice deadpan. They've clearly been at this for hours. Historians still argue whether these cryptic arts were the domain of professional diplomats alone, or if merchants used them too. After all, trade secrets were worth as much as royal ones. You shift your weight, careful not to rattle the old shutter. They move on to another project. A cipher. One pulls out a wax tablet and starts inscribing symbols that look like gibberish. But he has a key, an old book with a shifting alphabet. He explains it to his friend. One letter becomes another. Easy if you know the key. You hear pride in his voice. Security by obscurity, sure. But it worked, often enough. They argue about how many steps to shift the letters. 3, 5, 20. They debate heatedly, muttering about Caesar's method, as if the old emperor might show up to correct them. You can't help but smile at the earnestness of it. Even in this smoky, damp room, they're innovating. Outside, the wind howls down the lane. You pull your cloak tighter and listen as the discussion turns to materials. Vinegar, gall nuts, iron salts. They debate recipes the way bakers argue about sourdough. One insists his mixture is more legible under heat. The other swears by lemon juice. You gag quietly when he suggests urine works in a pinch. Science is glamorous like that. They're worried about the local bailiff who's been cracking down on heresy and witchcraft. You hear the fear in their voices. Secret writing isn't just for fun, it's dangerous. Get caught, and it's the stalks or worse. You slip away from the window, leaving them to their scheming. The lane is darker now. A single lantern swings from an iron bracket, its light warped by dirty glass. You follow it toward a larger building. You see the coat of arms above the door, a minor noble's townhouse. Rumor has it he pays good coin for ciphers to send to allies, rivals, or mistresses. You press your ear to the door. Inside, voices argue in French, Latin, and the local dialect. Confusion is part of the plan. One man boasts he can write a letter that even the Pope's clerks can't decode. Another claims he has a code so subtle it looks like a shopping list. You grin at that. Historians still argue whether these codes actually fooled anyone important, but the paranoia they inspired was real enough. You watch a servant hurry past with a letter tucked into his belt. You see the wax seal. Tamper with it and you're in trouble. So they get creative. False bottoms in boxes, letters inside hollowed-out loaves of bread. You imagine the baker's annoyance. Again with the secret messages? Can't you just order a normal loaf? You trail along the street. Another doorway glows with lamplight. Inside, a scribe copies text in perfect, looping script. But you notice something odd. He switches inks every few lines, leaving barely perceptible changes in color. A primitive steganography. The message is there, hidden in plain sight. Anyone reading it aloud would never know, only the intended recipient would. You tap the door frame lightly, and the scribe jumps. He glares at you. You raise your hands in mock surrender and move on. You wander further, listening to the wind whistle between buildings. A cat yowls from a rooftop, offended at your intrusion. You pause at another shop, window lined with jars of foul-looking paste. A scholar sells ink recipes. He swears his mixtures resist water, making them perfect for sailors, or for hiding messages in the bilge of a ship. He doesn't mention the smell, which is eye-watering. You suspect the secret ingredient is disappointment and fish guts. You ask him about invisible ink. He winks. Costs extra. You nod, amused. Everyone's got a hustle. You notice a battered scroll pinned behind the counter. It's covered in symbols, dots, and slashes. A code for trade routes. Merchants use ciphers, too. Protecting profit is as motivating as protecting a kingdom. Historians still argue whether these codes slowed trade or made it flourish. You figure both. Information is power, and power is messy. You buy a tiny vial of ink just to be polite, then step back into the street. The wind dies down, leaving the night unnaturally quiet. You hear your own breathing, slow and steady. You think about those men in the basement, risking their freedom to send hidden words. The scribe swapping inks, the noble plotting alliances with coded letters. Science isn't just in books and monasteries. It's in desperation, in the need to communicate when you shouldn't, to hide ideas from the wrong eyes. You smile tiredly. You get it. You've sent your own cryptic texts before, though hopefully with less vinegar and gall. You lean against a cold wall, watching the clouds part overhead. A single star peeks through. You breathe deep. The world keeps turning. Messages keep flowing. Secrets keep living, and you keep walking. Always listening. Always watching. Because there's more to find in these darkened streets. More to learn in the hush of the medieval night. You leave the scribes and codebreakers behind, winding through twisting alleys that grow wider as they approach the city's outer edge. The breeze freshens, cool and sharp, tinged with the scent of mud and something harsher, sulfur and charcoal. You wrinkle your nose and follow the smell, because of course you do. Ahead, you see a squat stone building with a tiled roof blackened by smoke. Orange light pulses from the open door, and the wind carries the sharp snap of flames. As you approach, your boots crunch on spent powder and broken pottery. Inside, figures move in the glow of the forge. They shovel charcoal into a brazier until the heat blazes white. Bellows wheeze and groan like a dying animal. One man squints at the flame and nods, satisfied, then tips in a sealed clay pot that cracks from the heat. spilling its contents in a controlled, sizzling burst. The floor is littered with older pots, broken open to reveal black powder. The work is slow, dangerous, and careful in that panicky, whispered way that makes you think no one here has both eyebrows. You press closer, hugging the wall. They're making gunpowder. The recipe came west via the Silk Road, wrapped in rumor and legend. Saltpeter, charcoal, sulfur. Simple enough if you know the ratios, which they do. Mostly. One wrong move, and the room will redecorate itself in red. You hear one man mutter a prayer under his breath as he stirs the mix with a wooden paddle. Another scolds him for moving too fast. You're amazed. They're not just fighting, but whisper fighting. Because yelling near gunpowder is probably a bad plan. Historians still argue whether the formula came directly from China in perfect form or got reinvented along the way. The West was late to the game, but once they learned it, they couldn't unlearn it. You watch as they test a small scoop in an iron dish outside the forge. It flares brightly, hissing and sparking, illuminating their grim faces. A boy cheers and earns a slap upside the head. "Quiet," growls the older man. "You want the guard on us?" You see why they're nervous. The City Watch doesn't love black powder experiments. Accidental explosions aren't great for property values, and if you're not sanctioned by the local lord, it can count as treason. You catch the smell of sulfur sharp in your nose, burning your throat a little. You cough, drawing a glare from a gray-bearded man. He looks you over and decides you're not worth yelling at. Instead, he carefully measures another batch, explaining to a younger apprentice that too much sulfur makes it unstable, too little, and it's useless. You watch the boy nod seriously, eyes wide, breathing fast. It's a fatherly lesson, except for the part where a wrong move will launch them both to heaven. You step back, wiping your nose. Near the corner of the room sits a battered old mortar. You watch a man pound saltpeter into finer grains, face set in concentration. He stops to massage his shoulder and mutters about the good old days when he was smart enough to be scared. You hide a smile. Remember that blacksmith from earlier? You bet he's buying this stuff in secret. Siege warfare changed fast when black powder showed up. You hear them talk about orders from a local lord. They need more for his gunners. Cannons are expensive, but a few barrels of powder can decide a siege. The older man sighs. "I liked it better when we made ink," he mutters. You get it. Science isn't always pure. Sometimes it's loud, smoky, and makes you money while killing your neighbor. You edge outside, grateful for the cold air. Beyond the workshop, you see a small courtyard where they store barrels. Each is marked with a crude symbol for danger. A skull with crossbones scrawled by someone with artistic ambition but limited skill. You see rats dart among the barrels. One man chases them off with a broom, cursing. He stops when he sees you and gives you a look that says, "Don't even think about stealing a pinch." You raise your hands in mock surrender and back away. Historians still argue whether gunpowder ended chivalry. The truth, a knight's armor didn't help much against an iron ball fired from a cannon. No heroic charge could save a castle wall from sustained bombardment. You imagine the shift in power. Nobles who relied on heavy cavalry found themselves paying alchemists and powder makers instead of smiths and farriers. Old hierarchies didn't crumble overnight, but they cracked. You wander toward the edge of town, boots sinking in mud churned by carts. A wagon rolls past you, driven by a sour-faced man wrapped in furs. You catch the smell of powder on him as he passes, and see the barrels lashed tight in the back. He doesn't meet your eyes. Smart. People might not ask too many questions if a load of wheat tips over in the road, but if a barrel of powder does? Boom. You keep moving, watching the stars appear in patches overhead as clouds drift apart. You hear it from a passing apprentice, muttered to his friend, "Why did the powder maker get divorced? He couldn't handle the sparks." You snort. Terrible. But in a place like this, you take your laughs where you can get them. You pass another workshop door ajar. Inside, you glimpse molds for shot and small iron cannons cooling on racks. A man curses as he files a seam smooth. Sparks fly. He's lost in concentration, oblivious to you. The black powder revolution is in full swing here. It's dirty, dangerous, and transformative. You see it in the lined faces of old smiths learning new trades, in the nervous glances of apprentices who understand what they're really making. You pause at the town's edge, leaning on a fence post slick with rain. Beyond it, you see rolling fields, quiet and dark. A distant castle crouches on its hill, silhouette stark against the deepening night. You wonder how long it'll stand once the Lord buys his first real cannon. You shiver, not from the cold but the thought. You pull your cloak tighter. The wind picks up, rattling loose shutters, sending scraps of parchment fluttering across the muddy ground. You step over them, careful not to slip. And you keep going, because there's always something else in the dark. Another experiment, another invention, another danger, waiting to be found. You trudge back toward the center of town, boots leaving wet impressions on the mud-slick road. The powder maker's sharp, chemical tang fades behind you, replaced by the smell of old timber, wet wool, and the faint smoke of hearth fires. The houses here are bigger, built to impress, their upper stories leaning out over the street like eavesdropping gossips. You pause at an iron-studded gate. Beyond it lies a courtyard lit with torches sputtering in the drizzle. Men in heavy cloaks huddle around a table, poring over large sheets of parchment pinned with stones to keep them from blowing away. You step closer. The torches throw long, jittery shadows over their faces. You see their eyes glint as they argue in hushed but heated tones. They're engineers. You spot sketches of walls, towers, and thick gates, cross-sections of spiral staircases, detailed drawings of hoists and counterweights, siege machines with labeled ropes and pulleys. One man stabs his finger at a drawing of a wall cross-section. Too thin, he snaps. One hit from a trebuchet and it's rubble. Another retorts that thicker walls cost more stone and labor. He makes a dismissive gesture, his ring flashing. Nobility? Or just rich? Hard to tell at night. You lean in, breath fogging in the cold. Historians still argue whether medieval engineers were artists or scientists. You see both here. They sketch graceful arches meant to bear weight. They scribble equations, rough but effective. And they scrawl curses in the margins when they can't get the math to work. You hear one mutter that the Lord is impatient. He wants a new curtain wall before winter. Another groans about needing more oxen to haul the stone. Practical science meet budget constraints. You glance at the table and see a plan for a bastion angled to deflect projectiles. It's primitive but clever. You remember the black powder shop from earlier. Walls like these won't hold forever against cannon fire. But these men don't know that yet. One of them sketches a trebuchet on another sheet. Long arm, counterweight, sling. You see little notations about rock weight, drop height, range. They argue over whether it needs iron reinforcement at the pivot. You shift your weight and grin. It's funny imagining these serious men building what is basically a giant yeet machine. One younger engineer makes a joke about using it to throw the tax collector over the walls. The others snort but hush him quickly. You chuckle under your breath. They test ideas with small models carved from wood. One flicks a tiny counterweight, sending a pebble skittering across the table. He whoops in triumph before the older one cuffs him on the head. We're not making toys. You beg to differ, but you keep quiet. They unroll another parchment showing a castle keep in cross-section. Spiral stairs curve tightly, forcing right-handed attackers to fight at a disadvantage. Murder holes above gates wait to rain rocks and boiling oil. You shiver. Medieval science isn't just about healing and learning. It's about killing better. One engineer taps a column design, explaining it will carry weight while using less stone. He's excited, gesturing wildly. Another rolls his eyes and says it'll collapse if the quarry sends inferior blocks. You see the stress on their faces. They're not building toys or pretty palaces. These walls decide who lives and who dies in a siege. Did you know medieval fortification design evolved constantly? Quirky detail. Some engineers took jobs with rival cities just to sabotage them. A little career mobility with bonus treason. You hear them mention one rival engineer who was hanged for selling secrets. They cross themselves and go quiet. Outside the courtyard, you spot laborers rolling barrels of lime for mortar. The air is acrid, making your eyes water. One curses as it spills, sending up a choking cloud. You step back, coughing. Further along, a carpenter's shed spills light onto the muddy lane. Inside, men shape timber for scaffolds and hoists. The air is full of sawdust, warm and sharp-smelling. A boy planes a beam, his fingers deft. A master shouts instructions about load-bearing joints and stresses. He slams a wooden mallet for emphasis. You hear them talk about pulley systems to lift stones 3 times a man's weight. You remember the battered drawing of a treadwheel crane you saw back with the scribes. Here it's real. Historians still argue whether these devices were local inventions or imported improvements. You think it doesn't really matter. Necessity is the real inventor here. You move on, your boots now caked in wet sawdust and lime. You find another workshop filled with ironworkers. Sparks fly from anvils as they shape nails, hinges, braces. 2 men wrestle with a length of chain meant for a drawbridge. One jokes they should test it on the apprentice. You watch a man quench a glowing hinge in oil. It hisses and smokes. He lifts it, inspects it, then tosses it into a bin with a dozen others. He doesn't even look tired anymore, just resigned. You see a plan for a portcullis pinned to the wall. Heavy beams, iron bracing, a clever pulley and counterweight, designed to drop fast and trap invaders in a deadly kill zone. You remember the quiet chanting in the monastery, the delicate water clocks, the whispering alchemists, and here, it's all noise and heat and sweat. Science as survival. You lean back against the doorframe and take it in. The smell of iron and oil, the glow of coals, the grunts of men lifting, shaping, perfecting. It's ugly, but it works. You step back out into the night. The wind has picked up again, rattling loose shutters and sending scraps of parchment dancing like startled ghosts. You watch them flutter and fall, then drift further down the road. Your eyes trace the city walls in the distance, their silhouette broken by towers and battlements. You know someone designed those walls. Someone argued over their thickness. Someone measured their angles. And someone else will figure out how to tear them down. You feel the chill seep through your cloak. You hunch deeper into it and keep moving. Because there's more to see tonight. More secrets in the dark. More whispered wonders waiting in the next pool of torchlight. You drift along the narrow street that snakes away from the fortress builders, your boots squelching in the mud that never seems to dry. Ahead, the town seems to hush itself. The sound of hammers and saws giving way to something softer. Scratching quills, murmured prayers, the gentle sigh of turning pages. You pause at the threshold of a low, thick-walled building whose tiny windows flicker with candlelight. The door stands half open, spilling a warm glow onto the cold stones outside. You step in carefully, blinking against the sudden brightness. Inside, you find a long, vaulted room lined with desks. Hooded monks hunch over parchment, their backs curved like question marks, quills scratching with relentless patience. It smells of wax, old vellum, and damp wool. Welcome to the scriptorium. You stand by the door for a moment, taking it in. Shelves sag under the weight of chained books. Scrolls lie stacked in neat bundles. A brazier burns low in the center of the room, fighting the chill, but adding its own smoky scent. A monk with an impressively bushy eyebrow scowls at you for letting in a draft. You mumble an apology and move along the wall. You watch as one scribe carefully traces the looping letters of Latin text, his quill slicing thin lines into the parchment. He pauses to sand the ink, then gently blows away the excess grains. His breath rattles with age. Beside him, a younger monk is illuminating a page. His brush moves with delicate precision, filling flowers and vines with deep green and burnished gold. You can't help but admire it, even if the subject is a dire warning about eternal damnation. Historians still argue whether monasteries were centers of learning or vaults that hoarded knowledge. Standing here, you see both truths. These men are preserving ideas no one else even knows exist, but they're also locking them behind Latin, chained books, and vows of obedience. You trail your fingers along a shelf lined with volumes so precious they're literally chained to the wood. Each one is worth more than a peasant's house. Some pages are so worn they've been scraped and rewritten, a palimpsest with secrets hidden under secrets. You squint at one old page and spot faint lines in Greek beneath the Latin. You wonder what lost wisdom lies buried there, smothered by prayers or polemics. A candle gutters low, spitting melted wax onto the table. The monk there swears under his breath and scrapes it off with a small knife. He glares at you for smiling. You keep moving, your boots quiet on the cold stone floor. A novice sits in the corner, painstakingly copying a bestiary. You pause to watch as he inks a lion with an improbable grin and wings. He looks up, sees you, and flushes crimson. He's new, you can tell, still treating every letter like it's a mortal sin to get it wrong. He coughs nervously and tries to hide a page with a dragon that has, generously, 6 legs and no symmetry. You give him a nod that says, "Nice effort," and move on. Further down the room, you see an older monk with glasses perched at the tip of his nose. He mutters as he compares 2 versions of the same text, crossing out errors and correcting phrases. He catches you watching and growls, "Aristotle didn't say that." You raise your eyebrows. He sighs. "A mistake from 3 copies ago," he explains, stabbing the page with his quill. "I'm fixing it." You realize this is quality control, 14th century style. Did you know scribes sometimes included snarky marginal notes? Quirky little jokes, complaints about cold fingers, or insults aimed at the text. You imagine this guy writing, "Whoever copied this before me is an ass," in the margin before the abbot can stop him. You pass a table where 2 monks whisper urgently. One's pointing at a book in Arabic script. The other shakes his head. "We can't copy it all," he says. "It's risky." You freeze. Translations from Arabic texts carried in math, medicine, astronomy, but they also carried accusations of heresy. You watch them argue, voices low and worried. Historians still argue whether these monasteries preserved ancient wisdom or censored it. You suspect it depends on who was abbot that year. You see a locked cabinet behind them. Bound volumes with iron clasps. Some bear titles you recognize. Galen, Ptolemy, Avicenna. Knowledge both revered and feared. You can't help but lean closer. A monk hisses at you to back up. You raise your hands and step away. You glance at the ceiling, its old beams blackened with smoke. Vines carved in the wood twist among small frowning gargoyles. Watching. Judging. You think about the alchemists with their smelly pots, the black powder makers risking accidental fireworks, the engineers sketching defenses under torchlight. And here, a different war entirely. A war of ideas. You see another monk carefully adding glosses in the margin of a Bible, clarifications, cross-references, arguments in tiny spidery Latin. This is scholarship as both devotion and debate. He pauses, rubs his tired eyes, and dips his quill again. He looks exhausted but determined. You smile despite yourself. You notice the room grows quieter. The older monks glance at the door. A tall figure in a heavier robe enters. The abbot, his face lined and stern. He surveys the room like a hawk. Conversations die immediately. Quills move faster. The abbot nods once, satisfied. He moves along the tables, glancing at work, occasionally tapping a mistake with his staff. He catches your eye and squints. You smile politely. He doesn't return it. You decide it's time to go. You slip back out into the cold night, the door creaking shut behind you. Outside, you exhale deeply, watching your breath fog in the chill. The silence feels heavier now, but the stars peek through ragged clouds overhead. You glance back once at the small windows. Candlelight still flickers there, warm and stubborn against the dark. Inside, monks are still scratching words onto parchment, trapping thoughts for the future. Hoarding them, saving them. It's hard to tell the difference sometimes. You turn away at last, boots crunching on gravel. You pull your cloak tighter, and you keep walking. Because there's always another story hiding in the shadows. Always another secret waiting to be copied. Always another voice trying to be heard, even if it's in a whisper. You leave the scriptorium behind, its shuttered windows throwing narrow bars of candlelight onto the lane. The night has grown colder, the wind sighing through alleyways like an old man telling stories no one wants to hear. Your boots crunch on frost-slick straw. You hunch deeper into your cloak and keep going. The street widens ahead into a small square lit by braziers. Figures gather here in small, heated knots. Some wear academic robes, though those robes are a little worse for wear, edges frayed, hems muddy. Others look like merchants' sons, clutching books in one hand and knives in the other. Welcome to the University District. You slow your steps, watching from those. A group of students argues in Latin, so florid it sounds like a duel of insults. One flings his arm dramatically and shouts about syllogisms. Another corrects him with relish, invoking Aristotle like a referee. A third just laughs and drinks straight from a clay jug, rolling his eyes at both. You stifle a grin. Historians still argue whether medieval universities were sanctuaries of learning or hotbeds of violent rivalry. The answer is obviously both. You watch as another group huddles by a brazier, swapping notes on Galen's theories of humors. Blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, one chants like a nursery rhyme. His friend corrects him, poking him in the ribs until they scuffle. They break apart, breath fogging in the cold, laughing. You ease closer. A nearby tavern door bangs open, spilling raucous laughter and a blast of warmth. More students stumble out, arms around each other's shoulders. One is reciting a love poem so badly that even he cracks up halfway through. He switches to cursing in flawless Latin. You smirk. Medieval student culture. Part scholar, part frat house, part knife fight. You notice a wall nearby scrawled with graffiti. Snakes, obscene doodles, crude commentary on the local bishop's preferences. Art, apparently, is timeless. You lean against the wall, listening as they bicker about tuition. One moans about fees owed to the rector. Another claims he'll pay in fish. His friends howl with laughter. Did you know in some medieval universities, students actually hired and fired their teachers? Quirky, right? Imagine your class voting you out because you're boring. You watch a tall, skinny scholar in a patched robe walk past, nose in a book. He doesn't see the puddle and promptly steps in it with a wet squelch. He swears, very unholy, and hops onto a dry patch, shaking out his soaked sandal. His friend helpfully quotes Augustine at him. The scholar flips him off without looking up from his page. You snort and keep moving. Ahead, a narrow alley runs between two tall houses, their upper floors nearly touching overhead. It's a wind tunnel, and you shiver as you pass through. You emerge into a courtyard filled with lantern light and shouting. Professors and students face off in furious debate. A gray-bearded doctor of medicine is arguing with a much younger man who insists Galen got it wrong about anatomy. The old man's voice booms. You question Galen? Galen. The young one just smirks. He never dissected a human body. Gasps. Scandal. Someone drops a book. Historians still argue whether these debates were genuine progress or empty theater. You suspect both. You watch as the older professor's face turns red. He sputters about tradition and the church. The younger man, drunk on both ale and new ideas, says, "Maybe tradition is wrong." You hold your breath, waiting for blows. Instead, they stomp off in opposite directions, students trailing both, still shouting. You exhale, amused. Near the edge of the courtyard, another small group sits cross-legged, sharing a single battered candle and a cheap wine jug. They take turns reading from a tattered Aristotle volume, arguing over definitions of the soul. You catch phrases like rational anima, vegetative principles, and the soul of a goat. One laughs so hard he chokes on his drink. You can't help but smile. You see a doorway leading into a dim hall. You slip inside. The smell hits you. Old wood, candle grease, damp wool cloaks drying on hooks. Inside, benches fill the room, and a master paces before a battered lectern. He's reading from a massive tome chained to the stand. You listen. He drones on about natural philosophy, but his eyes shine. He quotes Aristotle, yes, but also recent translations from Arabic scholars. He pauses to gesture wildly at a diagram of the spheres. You see students copying every word, brows furrowed. Others yawn behind their hands. One doodles a donkey with the master's face. It's not orderly. It's not polite. It's learning. Did you know universities had their own legal systems? Quirky detail. If you murdered someone, you might be tried in the university's court instead of the town's. Guess which one handed out lighter sentences. You watch a student fall asleep, chin on his chest, snoring softly. His friend elbows him awake. The master doesn't even notice. He's too busy describing celestial spheres in detail so dry it could preserve meat. You stifle a laugh and slip back outside. The courtyard is emptier now. The debates have moved to taverns or private chambers. A few students remain, heads together, plotting tomorrow's arguments. You see two scholars sitting on a stone step, cloaks wrapped tight, reading by shared candlelight. Their breath fogs as they murmur Latin conjugations. You catch a snatch of conversation about a professor they both hate. One vows to slip something unpleasant into his wine. The other suggests poison, but laughs to show he's kidding. Maybe. Historians still argue whether medieval universities unified Europe with shared learning or just spread rivalries faster. You watch these students and think, both. You lean against a post, letting the cold seep in. Overhead, the sky is clearer now, stars hard and bright in the winter air. You breathe slowly. Despite the noise and chaos, something real happens here. Ideas move, change, get challenged. You see that young rebel telling the old professor that Galen might be wrong. That spark is what matters. You straighten up. Your feet are freezing, your nose is numb, but you keep moving. Because the night is far from over, and there's more to see. More whispers in the dark, more wonders waiting just past the next pool of torchlight. You slip away from the brawling scholars, leaving the echo of Latin insults and laughter behind you. The streets narrow again, twisting like knotted roots. The wind changes direction here, carrying a new scent. Damp earth, crushed green stems, and something acrid, bitter, that prickles your nose. You follow it to a small, crooked house perched at the edge of the woods, just outside the city walls. Its door is ajar, warm lamplight cutting a thin line across the dark path. You hesitate for a heartbeat, then push it open. Inside, the air is heavy with smoke and dried herbs. Bundles hang from the beams overhead. Rosemary, sage, wormwood, lavender. Pots and mortars crowd the narrow table. A fire flickers low in the hearth, casting jittery shadows over a woman bent over a pile of roots. She doesn't look up. "Close the door," she says calmly. You do as told. She slices the root with a practiced hand. The knife is old but sharp, and she moves with methodical precision. You watch her drop the slices into a small pot of boiling water. Steam billows up, carrying the scent of earth and bitterness. "Fever remedy," she explains without glancing at you. You take a careful step closer. The floor creaks underfoot. She finally raises her head, eyes sharp and knowing. Her hair is bound in a rough scarf, and her fingers are stained green and brown. She looks tired but alert. "Don't touch anything," she warns. You freeze, hand halfway to a jar of dried mushrooms. She snorts. "Those'll kill you." You drop your hand. Historians still argue whether these herbalists were proto-scientists or charlatans. Watching her work, you're inclined toward the former. She adds honey to the pot, stirs, then pours the liquid into a small clay cup. She hands it to you, eyebrow raised. You hesitate. She rolls her eyes. "It's not poison. Waste of ingredients for that." You sip. It's bitter, with a faint sweetness that coats your tongue. "Helps with fever," she says again, softer this time. You hand it back. She sets the cup aside and starts sorting more herbs. You glance around. Jars line the shelves, some labeled in Latin, others with crude symbols. Crushed flowers, barks, oils. Animal bones cleaned and stacked. A small bundle of what you're pretty sure is dried frog. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. "Works on swelling." You smother a laugh. "Did you know medieval healers often used spells and prayers right alongside herbs?" Quirky, but true. Sometimes medicine and magic were the same thing. She sees your look and sighs. "People want a charm with their salve," she admits. "I give them both." You nod. Smart business. A sudden knock at the door makes you both jump. She sets down her knife carefully and wipes her hands. A man pushes in, cap in hand. He's breathing hard, eyes wild. "My wife," he gasps. "She's burning up." The herbalist doesn't panic. She nods once and starts gathering her things. The fever brew, a pouch of dried herbs, a small flask of oil. She pulls on a heavy cloak and beckons you with a jerk of her chin. You follow them into the night. Outside, the wind is sharp, cutting through your cloak. The road is dark but familiar. You catch glimpses of the city wall in the distance. torchlight flickering along the battlements. The man leads you to a tiny hovel. Smoke curls from a cracked chimney. He fumbles with the latch and bursts inside, calling his wife's name. You step in last. The heat inside is stifling. A woman lies on a straw pallet, flushed and shivering at once. She opens bleary eyes as the herbalist approaches. The healer murmurs gently, pressing the back of her hand to the woman's brow. She unwraps the pouch, sprinkles crushed herbs into a bowl of steaming water. The smell fills the room, sharp, clean, pungent. Breathe, she orders the woman. The patient obeys, gasping raggedly as the steam curls around her face. You watch silently, leaning against the wall. The husband paces, wringing his cap. The herbalist mixes more of the fever brew, forces it between the woman's lips. She wipes her brow with a cloth soaked in the same herbal water. Slowly, the shivering eases. The woman's breathing steadies. She slumps back onto the pallet, exhausted but calmer. The herbalist straightens up, rolling her shoulders with a pop. She'll sleep now. Keep her warm. Make her drink if she wakes. The husband thanks her in a rush, voice cracking with relief. He thrusts a few coins into her palm. She doesn't even look at them. She just closes his hand over them firmly. Use the rest for food, she says quietly. He tries to argue, but she shakes her head and heads for the door. You follow her back out into the cold. The wind slams the door shut behind you. You walk in silence for a while. She doesn't say anything, and neither do you. Finally she mutters, "They'll call me witch if she dies." You glance at her. She's not angry, just resigned. Historians still argue whether accusations of witchcraft were just excuses to punish women who knew too much. Standing next to her, you have an opinion. She snorts. "Church doesn't like competition," she adds. You grin. She rolls her eyes, but there's a faint smile there too. You follow her back to her crooked house. She dumps her satchel by the door and sinks onto a stool, rubbing her face. "I don't sleep much," she admits. You nod. You believe her. You watch her stir the coals in the hearth, feeding them carefully. The smoke rises lazily into the chimney. The shadows dance around the cramped space. She glances at you. "Don't you have somewhere to be?" You shrug. She snorts, grabs another bundle of herbs, and starts sorting again. You stand there for a long moment, the warmth of the fire on your face, the scent of crushed leaves and wet earth filling your nose. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, she keeps working. Because someone has to. You step back into the chill night air, leaving the herbalist's crooked house behind you, its crooked door creaking closed on the wind. The scent of rosemary and sage fades, replaced by the cold, metallic tang of wet stone and something else, sharp, astringent, unmistakable. The smell of blood. You follow it without really choosing to, feet squelching in mud and straw, past huddled houses and shuttered windows. Ahead, torchlight flickers in the courtyard of what looks like a guild hall repurposed for another need. You hear voices, low, tense, orders barked in Latin and French. A man groans in pain. You approach the open door cautiously. Inside, it's cramped and smoky from guttering torches jammed into iron sconces. Men cluster around a heavy table, its surface slick with something dark. You swallow. They're dissecting a body. Not exactly a formal classroom. No neatly labeled diagrams or clean aprons here. Just a cold slab, battered tools, and the constant threat of an ecclesiastical scandal. A man in a thick, fur-lined robe stands at the head of the table. His voice is steady, even bored, as he identifies parts. Humerus, scapula, note the attachment here. You watch a student lean in too close and jerk back with a strangled noise when the flesh gives under the scalpel. He turns away, hand over his mouth, fighting to keep his supper down. The master doesn't pause. He continues with a certain grim glee, pointing out the spread of muscle, the placement of nerves. Historians still argue whether these sessions were officially sanctioned or conducted in hushed, guilty secrecy. You see enough side eyes in the room to suspect it's the latter tonight. You shift your weight, watching the candlelight gleam wetly on the incision. The smell is almost unbearable. Rot, old blood, and wine someone spilled to cut the stink. The master wipes his knife on a rag so black with old gore it could be mistaken for tar. He waves at the students to come closer. No one moves. He sighs. Cowards. You stifle a laugh that comes out more like a cough. He drones on about Galen, about accepted truths carried down from Rome and Alexandria. But you notice his fingers tracing a structure in the body that clearly doesn't match the old texts. He hesitates, then shakes his head. "Copy it anyway," he mutters. You hear the scratch of quills on parchment. Students hunched, scribbling frantically, refusing to meet the corpse's cloudy stare. One mumbles a prayer under his breath. You spot a man at the back rolling his eyes. He leans over to his friend. "Praying won't make it cleaner." His friend punches his shoulder. You exhale slowly, watching condensation cloud in the torchlight. Did you know some medieval universities banned dissection outright, while others winked at it as long as no one complained? Quirky system. Don't ask, don't tell, don't stink up the whole town. You notice a basin in the corner. Water sloshes murkily. A student dips his hands, grimacing at the color. He tries to wipe them clean on a rag that's already soaked through. He sees you watching and scowls. "Never seen an anatomy lesson?" he demands. You shrug. "Not one so aromatic." He snorts, despite himself. "Get used to it. This is the future." He's not wrong. You shift closer to the table. The master demonstrates how tendons attach, pulling them taut so they stand out like puppet strings. The corpse twitches in response to the tension, making one student scream like a child. The master actually smiles at that. "See?" he says. "It moves even in death. Muscles are predictable. Study them, control them." He gestures for a student to take over. The boy looks like he might faint. He steps forward anyway. You nod to yourself. Brave or stupid. Usually both. The boy cuts carefully. Too shallow. The master snaps at him. He cuts deeper. Too deep. Blood that should have clotted days ago leaks sluggishly. The master growls and snatches the blade back. "You'll ruin it." Historians still argue whether these teachers were innovators or sadists. You think you see both tonight. Someone opens a shutter for fresh air. It does nothing. The smell is in everything. Your hair, your clothes, your lungs. You cough into your sleeve, feeling bile rise, but you don't leave. You watch the master peel back layers of tissue, naming them with precision. The students flinch, but they watch, they write, they learn. He rants about quacks who refuse to study anatomy. He curses barbers who hack limbs without understanding how they work. He rails against bishops who forbid this work, even as they benefit from surgeons trained in secret. He pauses to spit on the floor. You blink. Charming. He leans in, voice dropping. "They call us butchers, but we save more lives than they do." You hold his gaze. He doesn't flinch. You nod once. He grunts and goes back to work. In a corner, a small group huddles over sketches. One holds up a rough drawing of the human arm, lines showing the major muscles and tendons. It's crude, but it's right. They argue over the shape of the liver. One insists on Galen's description. Another points at the corpse. It's not shaped like that. Historians still argue whether medieval dissections corrected old errors or just added confusion. You suspect both, judging by the shouting match. The master roars at them to shut up and look. He slices open the abdomen with a steady hand, narrating the whole time like a tour guide in hell. You swallow hard. A student turns green, drops his quill, and rushes out, gagging. The master doesn't miss a beat. "Coward," he mutters. You're inclined to agree with the runner, but you stay. Because this is science too, ugly, cruel, necessary. You watch until the torch gutters low, the smoke thick enough to choke you. The master calls it done and waves them off. Students scatter, faces pale, some whispering prayers, others arguing. You linger. The master wipes his knife with grim care. He sees you. "Learn something?" he asks flatly. You nod. He grunts. "Good." He turns back to the corpse, gently closing the eyes with ink-stained fingers. You leave quietly. Outside, the wind slaps your face like a cleansing ritual. You breathe deep, filling your lungs with freezing air, trying to scrub the smell from your memory. The stars are out, hard and cold. You keep moving, because there's more to see, more truths waiting in the dark, more secrets carved in flesh and written in blood. You leave the dissecting room behind, boots crunching over frost-rimed straw that muffles the pounding of your heart. The air outside is painfully crisp, cleansing your lungs in one ragged gulp after another. For a moment you just stand there, doubled over, coughing out the cloying stench of gore and old candle grease. When you straighten, the night seems darker, quieter. But it's not empty. Ahead, down an alley lined with shuttered workshops and barred stalls, you see another glow of lamplight spilling onto the cobbles. It's a thin, wavering thread of gold that catches your eye. You follow it, because you always do. This door is half open, creaking with every wind gust. You ease it wider with the tip of your boot and peer in. At first glance, it looks like any workshop. Benches, tools, wood shavings scattered like dry leaves. But you blink twice and see the shapes. Figures of birds and beasts sit in frozen postures on the tables, carved from wood and brass. A snake with fangs bared. A lion whose mouth is a gaping hinge. A strange bird with segmented wings held open on delicate springs. Automata. You step inside carefully, boots whispering on the sawdust. A man hunched over a workbench doesn't look up. He's intent on a brass gear no bigger than a coin. His fingers are black with oil and soot. Beside him lies a half-finished knight in articulated plates, arms jointed with wire, waiting for life it'll never have. You clear your throat. He glances up, eyes glassy with exhaustion, and gestures you in without a word. You watch as he threads wire through the gear, attaching it to a tiny crank. He turns it experimentally. The teeth catch, the whole assembly ticks once. He sighs in relief. You edge closer. The shop is packed with failed dreams. Wooden birds with wings frozen mid-flap. Metal dogs whose legs have seized up. A tiny carriage with no driver but a delicate balance mechanism that's snapped in two. You pick one up carefully. A toy soldier with gears in its back. You see the key still in place. You wind it gently. It jerks once, squeaks, and the arm moves halfway up before stopping with a pitiful clunk. You set it down gently. The craftsman watches you, expression unreadable. Historians still argue whether these mechanical marvels were true science or elaborate jokes for bored nobles. Looking at this man's lined face, you're not so sure either. You watch him reach for a jug of water and sip, wiping his mouth with the back of his sleeve. He gestures at the mess with a weary flick of his fingers. "For the Duke's children," he mutters. You nod, understanding. They want dancing dolls, fluttering birds, wind-up dragons that breathe tiny flames. He snorts. "Little monsters," he says with a crooked grin. You laugh quietly. He returns to his work, jaw tight. You see the blueprints under his elbow, curling at the corners. Lines and circles. Notes in cramped Latin. Angles calculated and recalculated. You recognize some of the symbols, ratios for lever arms, gear tooth counts. It's engineering masquerading as whimsy. He notices your stare and grunts. They don't care how it works, just that it does. You nod again. He shifts a broken automaton aside and reveals something else. A small model of a water wheel, connected gears that turn a spit over a tiny clay fireplace. It's beautiful in its own way. Efficient. Practical. He taps it once and it spins slowly. "Real work," he mutters. You sense the bitterness. The nobles want toys, but he wants solutions. You glance around. In one corner lies a larger figure, half shrouded in a sheet. You can see the glint of polished brass joints, the carved wood of a human face. You step toward it, curiosity overpowering manners. He doesn't stop you. You lift the sheet carefully. It's a woman, or rather, a woman-shaped machine. Articulated fingers, brass hinges at the elbows. The face is unfinished, one side still blocky, the other hauntingly smooth. You see tiny drilled holes along the jawline. Space for springs. "She was supposed to pour wine," the craftsman says behind you, voice suddenly quiet. You glance back. He's not looking at you, just staring at her with an unreadable expression. "She was for a wedding feast," he continues, voice flat. "Bride's father paid. Then the plague came. Cancelled everything." You let the sheet fall back into place. You say nothing. Outside, the wind moans around the doorframe like a ghost looking for someone to blame. Did you know medieval courts paid enormous sums for these automata? Quirky status symbols. A mechanical lion that roared. A bird that sang. Even a chess-playing Turk that wasn't so much science as misdirection and showmanship. The craftsman moves past you, rummaging through a crate. He pulls out a pile of broken gears, eyes dull. "Scrap," he mutters. "Too many teeth wrong." You watch him sift them with his calloused fingers. Metal scraping metal, a miserable little song. Historians still argue whether these devices inspired real engineering or were just entertainment. You see both tonight. You watch the man sit back down. He takes a deep breath and picks up another gear, squinting at it in the lamp's flicker. His hands tremble with exhaustion, but he keeps going. You realize he's not doing it for the nobles. He's doing it because he can't stop. Because once you know how the gears work, you want to make them move. You glance around one last time. The shop is a graveyard of half-born dreams, but it's also a nursery for something new. You step back outside, closing the door gently behind you. The cold hits you like a slap. You inhale deeply, clearing the oil and brass from your nose. The stars are still there, cold and patient. You keep moving, because there's more to see. More shadows waiting to reveal their wonders. More silent questions asked by minds that can't stop trying to answer. You step back into the street, boots cold from the automaton maker's floor, the wind cutting along the alleys like a blade sharpened on frost. You rub your gloved hands together, blowing warm breath into your fingers, then pull your hood lower against the biting air. Ahead, the town stretches toward the river docks and the dark sprawl of warehouses. Even in the small hours, there's life here. The creak of mooring ropes, the wet slap of water against pilings, the barked orders of men loading casks by torchlight. But you're not looking at the cargo. Your eye is caught by the piles of parchment and bundled scrolls strapped with twine, stacked in a pushcart beside one flickering lantern. Maps. You move closer. The seller, a middle-aged man in a patched cloak, leans against the cart's side, arms crossed against the chill. He eyes you warily, but gestures with his chin for you to look. You do. The top map is a sprawling tangle of lines and notations. Coasts rendered in wobbly black ink, mountains sketched as fat bumps. Little sea monsters leer from the empty ocean, all curling tails and open jaws. A windrose spreads across one corner, its compass points marked with decorative letters. You pick it up carefully, feeling the stiff parchment crackle at the edges. Coastal, the seller says flatly. Good down to the old port, past the Cape. You squint at the symbols for towns, realizing some are spelled 3 different ways on the same sheet. You snort. He shrugs. No one agrees. Historians still argue whether medieval maps were useful tools or elaborate works of art to impress patrons. Judging by this one, both. You set it down and look at another. This one's a portal and chart. More practical. Cleaner lines, compass roses spiraling across the page, radiating rum lines like a starburst. The harbors are named carefully, some in Latin, others in the local dialect. He notices your interest. Made by Genoese, he says, voice low with respect. You nod. The Italians know their charts. Their sailors trust these lines enough to sail into storms for profit. You see the coastline's sharp accuracy fade to vague curves as it reaches unfamiliar lands. Beyond the known, monsters return. You run your finger along one labeled simply, "Here be lions." You smirk. Did you know medieval cartographers loved filling blank spaces with monsters? Quirky branding choice. Come for the trade routes, stay for the sea serpents. You pick up a rolled chart bound in waxed cord. The seller watches you carefully. Expensive, he says. You raise an eyebrow. He leans in. It's got the new routes, up north. You glance at it, intrigued. Routes along fjords and islands with notes in cramped script warning of reefs, ice, and locals who do not trade fairly. You imagine the man who mapped it, cold breath fogging as he marked hazards with frozen fingers. You hand it back gently. The seller eyes you. You're not buying? You shake your head. He shrugs. Didn't think so. Not many do. Safer to stay home. You nod once. You turn away and follow the smell of tar and salt toward the docks. The river is a black ribbon, reflections of torchlight shivering on its surface. You pass a small group of sailors arguing in 3 languages about how best to load a crate without smashing the pickled fish inside. One gestures wildly with a rope in his hand and nearly brains a friend. They break into laughter so loud it echoes off the warehouse walls. You keep going. Further along, you see a lean figure crouched over a small table in the lee of a warehouse wall. He has a candle jammed in a bottle for light, and he's scratching a quill across parchment with frantic precision. You stop, curious. He doesn't even notice you at first. He's mumbling to himself about tides and bearings. You see the half-finished map he's working on. Part river, part coastline, with notes about depths and currents in tiny, cramped letters. He finally glances up, startled. He squints at you, blinking like an owl in torchlight. Sorry, you say quietly. He shrugs. Need to finish before the tide turns. You nod, watching as he dips the quill and draws another careful line. Historians still argue whether these local maps were shared knowledge or trade secrets. From the way he hunches over it, you guess the latter. He leans back to study his work, frowning at a crooked river bend. He sighs and carefully crosses it out before redrawing it in a slow, deliberate arc. You see his fingers are stained with ink, nails cracked. A lifetime of this. You glance around. More charts lie rolled beside him, each tied with string, labeled in a messy but clear hand. You spot one labeled simply, Deep Water. He notices your interest and grunts. Safe anchorage, if you can pay. You grin. He doesn't. You step back, giving him room to work. Beyond him, the river widens and disappears into the dark. You imagine ships sailing out at dawn, hugging these half-guessed coastlines, hoping the charts are right, praying the monsters are only ink. You hear a sailor's laugh cut short by a shouted order. The dock creaks under the weight of cargo. A gull screeches overhead, then falls silent. You keep walking. Did you know medieval sailors often memorized routes by chanting them? Quirky mnemonic practice, singing your way across the sea. You smile at the thought of them harmonizing badly as they steer past rocks that could wreck them. You pass another card of maps, these drawn in thick, bold lines. Less art, more billboard. A merchant hawks them to travelers with loud promises of shortcuts that are almost certainly made up. You see a couple buying one anyway. Desperation, hope, greed. All reasons to trust a bad map. You wander toward the last warehouse, where a fire burns in a barrel outside. Around it huddle two older sailors, comparing scars and arguing about which island is haunted and which one just has bad weather. One sees you and waves you over with a grin full of gaps. You join them. He points at the flames, voice husky. Maps lie, friend. Only way to know is to sail it. His companion cackles. Agreement, raising a flask. You nod slowly, feeling the truth of it settle into your bones. You lean against the barrel, letting the fire warm your frozen fingers. You listen to them tell tall tales about storms that swallowed fleets whole, about lights in the water no one could explain, about islands that shifted when you blinked. Historians still argue whether these were legends or misunderstood phenomena. You decide it doesn't matter. Either way, they made the maps more interesting. The sailors eventually quiet, staring into the fire with glassy eyes. You take that as your cue to move on. You step away from the docks, leaving the smell of fish and tar and cheap rum behind. You look up once at the stars, pinpricks of cold light, as old as any map. You breathe in the night air. And you keep going, because there's more to see. More lines to follow on parchment and on muddy roads. More monsters waiting at the edges of every known thing. You leave the river docks behind, boots squelching in muddy ruts carved by cartwheels and hooves, the map seller's calls fading into the darkness. The road twists up a gentle rise toward the town's edge. You pause at the crest, looking back at the jumble of rooftops, chimneys smoking against the starlight, the glow of scattered lanterns reflecting off wet stone. Then you turn forward. Ahead, the lane dips into a quieter quarter, its buildings smaller, poorer, and darker. No bustling markets or shouting sailors here. Just narrow alleys where damp laundry hangs limply even at this hour, and small windows flicker with the faintest candlelight. You follow one crooked lane until you see it. A small shop with a warped wooden sign that squeaks in the wind. Its window is glazed with old bubbled glass, catching the lamplight from inside and scattering it in pale twisted patterns. You press your face close and squint. Inside, you see shelves stacked with polished spheres, small brass tubes, chunks of oddly clear glass wrapped in cloth. A man hunches at a work table, adjusting something with painfully careful fingers. You push the door open with a creak. The bell above it jingles, A sound so small it seems almost embarrassed to exist. The man glances up. His eyes are huge behind round glass lenses strapped to his head with thin leather. He looks like an anxious owl forced to pay rent. You nod politely. He nods back, jerking his chin at the room. Look around if you want, he says, voice rough but not unkind. You step in, boots tapping on the warped floorboards. Everywhere you look there's glass. Polished lenses in tiny wooden frames. Cut crystals catching the lamplight in rainbow shards. Long brass tubes capped with dark glass. You pick one up carefully. It's heavier than you expected. Don't drop it, he warns automatically without looking up. You nearly drop it out of spite, but think better of it. You lift it to your eye. The world blurs into twisted light, then resolves into sharp lines that make you blink. You see details in the cracked plaster wall you hadn't noticed before. The way the lath peeks through, the tiny fossil of a squashed fly. You lower it slowly. Magnifying lens, he says flatly, as if describing bread. Historians still argue whether these early lenses were toys, tools, or genuine scientific instruments. You set it down carefully. He adjusts his own magnifying visor and goes back to his work, using tweezers to place a tiny shard of glass onto a larger disc. He breathes slowly, steadily, the lamp near his elbow flickering as if in sympathy. You wander to another shelf. Small brass tubes lie in a row. You pick one up, testing its weight. Telescope, he says without looking. You blink. Really? He sighs. In theory. You grin, despite yourself. He finally looks at you, his big lensed eyes magnifying his irritation. If the glass is ground wrong, it's worthless, he grumbles. You look at the stars and see 10 of them where there's one. You nod solemnly. Or a smear, or a blur, or nothing. He lifts the shard he'd been working on, holds it to the lamp and squints through it. He frowns, muttering about aberrations. He puts it down with a sigh that seems to deflate his entire body. You look around. You see other lenses discarded in a bucket. Some are chipped, others are warped, wavy, like the surface of a pond. Failures, you ask? He snorts. Practice. You pick one up and see the world swim in sickening curves. You put it back quickly. Did you know medieval lens grinders sometimes kept their techniques secret, passing them down like family recipes, quirky little trade secrets? You ask him about it. He shrugs. My father taught me, said it was cursed work. You raise an eyebrow. Because you see too much, he adds quietly. You fall silent. He goes back to work, the quiet filled with the scrape of glass against stone as he grinds. Outside, wind howls against the window, rattling it in its frame. You watch him for a while, hypnotized. He breaks the silence eventually. People want reading stones, he says. Magnifiers. You nod. They pay well. You wait. He scowls at his glass. No one pays for what it could be. You see it then. The dream that doesn't pay. You look around at the glass tubes, the abandoned telescopes, the lenses half ground and tossed aside. He's trying to see the stars. You pick up one finished lens, holding it to the lamp. Light scatters through it in jagged shards. You see green, yellow, violet fringes at the edge. Chromatic aberration, he mutters. You turn to look at him. He waves a dismissive hand. Fancy word for it, looking like shit. You bark a laugh that surprises you both. He smiles, barely. Historians still argue whether these early optics were crucial steps or useless distractions. You set the lens down carefully. He nods once in approval. You glance at a parchment pinned to the wall. Diagrams show light rays bending through glass, notes in cramped, smudged script. Equations half solved, half abandoned. You trace one line with your finger, imagining the path of the light. He watches you. You like that? You nod. Good, he says softly. Means you're cursed too. You grin. He goes back to grinding. You step to the window and peer out at the night. The stars are distant pinpricks, pale and cold. You imagine looking at them through one of his better lenses, seeing them as discs instead of points, understanding them. You turn back to him, opening your mouth to ask something else. But he's hunched over again, lost in the tiny world under his magnifier. You don't interrupt. You let the door creak shut behind you as you step back into the night. The wind hits you immediately, making your eyes water. You look up at the stars one more time. You breathe deep. And you keep walking. Because there's always more to see. More wonders hiding in the dark. More secrets waiting for someone to grind the glass just right to find them. You step back into the night, the lens grinder's glow shrinking behind you, replaced by the long, cold hush of the sleeping town. Your boots thump dully on rutted lanes, kicking puddles that mirror the moon in fractured silver. But ahead, there's noise, a different kind of glow. You follow the wavering flicker of multiple lanterns clustered around the entrance of what used to be a merchant's hall. Its tall wooden doors carved with fading heraldry. The doors stand wide tonight, propped with barrels, welcoming a steady trickle of visitors. You see students in patched robes, wide-eyed apprentices, even a few merchants drawn by curiosity. They pay coins to a man at the entrance who drops them into a small, clanking box. You slip inside behind them. The air is thick with smoke from tallow candles jammed into every iron sconce. The smell is of wax and unwashed wool, overlaid by the sharp, sweet scent of freshly inked pages. Because this isn't just a meeting, it's a demonstration. You see them immediately. Rows of tables line the hall, each covered in neat stacks of printed pages. Not handwritten, but printed. Uniform letters pressed in perfect lines on cheap paper, edges ragged from hasty trimming. A man in a long coat stands at the front of the room, face flushed with triumph and sweat. He holds up a single sheet between ink-stained fingers. "This," he booms, voice cracking from excitement and fatigue. "This is freedom." You bite back a grin at the earnest drama. He slams the paper down on the table, sending a puff of dust into the smoky air. People lean in, printed words, crisp, even. Not the shaky scrawl of a rushed scribe. He picks up another, a broad sheet filled with blocky letters. It has a woodcut illustration of a bishop with his mouth comically agape. You hear someone snicker. He grins like a fox. "They can't stop it anymore," he says, voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. You step closer, boots tapping on the creaky floor. Near the back of the hall, you spot the real heart of the operation. A press itself, iron and wood, stained with old ink. 2 apprentices work it by turns, their arms straining to pull the screw down, pressing paper onto inked type. One apprentice curses as a page tears. The other laughs and calls him a butcher. You see a pile of ruined sheets tossed aside. Historians still argue whether the printing press was revolutionary or just inevitable. You watch the sweating apprentices and decide there's nothing inevitable about this labor. You lean closer to a table stacked with freshly printed pamphlets. You pick one up. It's a sermon. Harsh words about corruption in the city council, naming names. You whistle softly. The merchant beside you eyes it and shuffles a little further away. You set it back down. Another stack nearby has medical recipes, printed for traveling healers, too poor for university training. You see lists of herbs, weights, instructions. You glance at the ink on your fingertips, smudged but clear. You feel the page's rough edges, see the imperfect impressions where the type bit too hard. Did you know early printers used wine presses repurposed for their craft? Quirky detail, from squeezing grapes to squeezing truth onto paper. You smirk at your own thought. The demonstrator catches you watching. He beckons you closer. "Look," he says, voice low but urgent. He picks up a letter. Latin text, crisp, tight, repeating page after page. "Galen," he breathes. "Medicine. We can make 100 copies in a week." You nod. He drops it on the table with a thunk. "No more monks taking years to make mistakes." You watch his eyes, fever bright. "No more gatekeepers," he whispers. You let that sit in the air. He doesn't wait for your answer. He moves on to another cluster of customers, selling them on salvation and heresy at the same time. You wander deeper. In one corner, a trio of students argue over a stack of freshly printed Aristotle. One insists it's a bad translation. Another says it's better than nothing. The third just mutters that he can't afford a hand-copied version anyway. You hear them bicker about Latin tenses and roll your eyes. Some things never change. Near them, a priest picks through a pile of tracts with an expression somewhere between horror and fascination. He drops a few coins and leaves quickly, the papers hidden under his robe like stolen sin. You turn toward the press itself. The apprentices are resetting the type, fingers black to the knuckles. You watch them rearrange tiny metal letters, each reversed and precise. A dropped letter pings on the floor. The older apprentice curses in German. He sees you smirking and glares. You shrug. You lean in to watch them ink the type with padded balls, rolling it carefully to avoid smears. You see the fine lines of the letters, crisp in the lamplight. They lay the paper carefully, swing the platen over it, and wind the screw with a creak and groan that sounds like the old building itself is complaining. They release the screw, lift the platen, and peel back the paper. Another page. You see the words stand out bold and black, even in the guttering light. It's magic. Ugly, mechanical, greasy-fingered magic. Historians still argue whether Gutenberg's press spread truth or just new lies faster. You see the answer in the faces around you. Yes. Yes to all of it. You step back. You see the man in the coat counting coins, making deals, arguing with city guards who want their cut. You see apprentices rolling ink onto plates while complaining about their wages. You see a student stuffing pamphlets under his robe before running out into the dark. You see words multiplying like mice. Unstoppable. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with smoke, ink, and the sharp bite of ambition. You exhale slowly. Then you turn and walk out, the door banging softly behind you. Outside, the cold hits you like a thrown bucket of water. You shiver, pulling your cloak tighter. But you can't stop smiling, because you know that back in that hall, they'll keep printing until the candles burn out. And tomorrow, there will be more pages, more ideas, more arguments, more truths and lies, both impossible to put back in the bottle. You keep walking, because there's more to see tonight. More wonders whispered on cheap paper. More revolutions hiding in the clack of type and the squeal of a press. You step out into the night from the printer's hall, blinking at the sudden hush. The wind feels colder now, biting through your cloak. Your fingers are still stained with ink from those freshly printed pages, smudged black reminders that ideas don't stay contained for long. You rub them together absently, watching the smears glisten in the faint moonlight. But you're not done yet. The street bends away from the crowded lanes of apprentices and students, winding toward a quieter edge of town. You follow the curve, boots crunching on gravel and patches of frozen mud, until you see it. An old workshop crouched against the outer wall. Its roof sags under the weight of decades. The windows glow with flickering candlelight, but the panes are so caked with soot they barely let it out. You hear low voices inside, serious, murmuring. You push the door open with a protesting creak. Inside it's cramped, walls lined with battered shelves. Glass flasks catch the candlelight, throwing twisted reflections. Stained parchment is pinned in layers on every available surface, covered in cryptic symbols, circles within circles. The smell hits you immediately. Sulfur, vinegar, a sharp bite of something metallic. Two men look up from a bench covered in small crucibles and blackened spoons. One squints at you, frowning. The other just sighs. "Shut the door," the first says. You do, feeling the heat close around you, thick and close. You wander closer, pretending not to notice how they hover protectively over the table. You spot it immediately. A battered old alembic, its glass cracked and repaired with wire. A small flame licks under a crucible. Something hisses as it boils. They're making an experiment. Alchemy. One of them mutters, "Base metals again." The other snorts. "Always base metals." You stifle a grin. Historians still argue whether alchemy was a proto-science or just elaborate fraud. Watching them here, you see both truths wrestling like twins. One of them stirs the crucible with a thin iron rod, watching the color change. He leans in until the steam makes him cough violently. He jerks back, cursing, wiping his eyes with a filthy rag. You ask him what he's trying to make. He doesn't answer immediately. Finally, he sighs. "Gold," he mutters, almost embarrassed. You raise an eyebrow. The other snickers. "What? You think we're philosophers? We have bills." They both laugh. You glance at the symbols scratched into the parchment on the wall. They're part recipe, part prayer, part cipher. "Sulfur, salt, mercury," one explains in a resigned voice. "The tria prima, transform base metal, purify the spirit, make it perfect." He says it like he's reciting a joke no one finds funny anymore. You watch as he adds a pinch of powder to the crucible. The mixture flares briefly green, then subsides into dull gray. He slams the spoon down. "Damn it," he mutters. His friend pats his shoulder. You see the exhaustion in both their eyes. The walls of the shop are lined with failed dreams, cracked flasks, empty vials, parchment scrawled with half-finished theories, notes about heating times and ratios that don't quite add up. You realize none of them can stop. They know it's probably impossible, but maybe tomorrow's mixture will be the one. You wander along the wall, trailing your fingers over old, brittle parchment. One corner has a sheet pinned up with special care. It's a diagram of the philosopher's stone. Perfect circles, notes about spiritual purification, symbols for fire, air, water, earth. You look back at the men hunched over their cheap flame, their cracked crucible. One of them notices your look. He snorts. "Not exactly gold," he says. You grin. They both return to work. You stand in the corner, watching them in the smoky half-light. You see the seriousness with which they test tiny variations. The way they whisper to each other about ratios, about the right color at the right temperature. Historians still argue whether alchemy was superstition or chemistry in disguise. You see it as both. You see the failure, sure, the wasted lives, the crushed dreams, the men who ruined themselves chasing lead into gold. But you also see the precision, the observation, the obsession with detail. They keep notes. They try again. They record what didn't work. They're scientists. Bad ones, maybe, but scientists. You clear your throat. One of them glances at you. You ask if they've ever sold gold. They laugh hard. One wipes a tear from his eye. "God, no," he says. "We sell cures for gout, dyes, pigments." His friend adds, "We sold a noblewoman a potion for eternal youth. Rose water and honey, she loved it." They laugh again, the sound almost sad. You ask if they feel guilty. They go quiet. The first one finally shrugs. "People want hope," he says. The other just mutters, "Better us than some priest." You look around the room one more time. The walls lined with failed recipes, the cracked glass, the heat of the small flame, the hiss of boiling mystery. You take a breath. The smell burns your nose. You step back. They barely notice you leaving. Outside, the cold hits you like a slap. You stand for a moment shivering, listening to the wind howl along the old city wall. You close your eyes. You see the alchemists behind your eyelids, hunched over their table. Not philosophers, not priests, just men who can't stop trying. You take a slow breath and you keep moving, because there's more to see, more dreams to watch die in smoky little rooms, more failures that just might turn into something else, more secrets waiting to burn your nose and stain your fingers. You pull your cloak tighter against the wind, the alchemist's cracked laughter and green-tinged smoke fading behind you as you walk back into the night. Your boots slip on wet cobbles slick with melting frost. The sky overhead is lighter now, dawn's first breath pushing back the stars. But you're not done. You follow the road uphill, winding past sleeping houses with shuttered windows and soot-streaked chimneys. A black dog eyes you from a doorway, tail thumping once before it settles its head back on its paws. Ahead, you see the sprawl of another building, its roof sagging in the middle like an old man's spine. The door is ajar, a pale glow leaking out onto the path. You push inside. It's warm in here, too warm. Heat radiates from multiple forges lined along one wall. Glowing red, iron doors ajar to show flames licking at the bricks. The air smells of soot, hot iron, and something sharper, burned parchment and spilled ink. Men work here, their faces blackened, shirts stained, sleeves rolled. But they're not shaping swords or shoeing horses. They're hunched over tables covered in glassware, balancing weights on old brass scales, watching flames under alembics, stirring strange brews that hiss and spit when they touch water. One glances at you, squinting. "Door," he grunts. You close it behind you, shutting out the dawn chill. They go back to work. These aren't alchemists in the old sense. The symbols on the walls are simpler now. Notes about ratios, about temperatures, about times. No circles within circles promising eternal life. Just straightforward instructions. One man pours a thick liquid from a retort into a beaker, careful as a priest handling relics. Another grinds something in a mortar with slow, steady rotations, his lips moving in silent counting. You wander deeper. A chart is pinned to the wall. It's smudged but legible. Lists of metals, their melting points, their behaviors when mixed, their color changes under heat. You see notes about acids scrawled in a different hand. Aqua fortis, dissolve silver. You hear a curse as a flask cracks under too much flame. The contents hiss and bubble onto the table. The man swears, grabs a rag, and mops it up with grim resignation. Too hot, someone mutters. Record it, another replies without looking up. Historians still argue whether this is still alchemy or the beginning of chemistry. You stand there, listening to the steady scrape of pestles on stone, the hiss of burners, the dribble of liquids through tubes. It's quieter than the alchemist's workshop you left before. No shouting about philosopher's stones, no frantic prayers. Just work. One man sits at a table with a battered ledger. He dips a quill and notes measurements, times, results. When someone calls out a failure, he doesn't flinch, just writes it down. Important, he says, voice like gravel. You see that the failures matter as much as the successes here. You lean over a table. A clear liquid bubbles slowly in a flask, connected by glass tubing to a second flask, where condensation collects in shimmering drops. The man tending it eyes you. Distillation, he says flatly, like you're a child asking why the sky is blue. You nod. He doesn't elaborate. Just flicks the burner lower with 2 fingers, watching the flames adjust. Did you know medieval distillers perfected the techniques alchemists half understood? Quirky how something meant for spirits turned into spirit. You smile at the thought. The man notices but doesn't ask. He's busy. Another workbench has piles of small, ingot-shaped lumps of metal. Notes beside them list alloys, ratios of tin to copper, of lead to antimony. One man files a piece carefully, watching the shavings fall like gray snow. He wipes sweat off his brow with a sleeve blackened by days of this. You realize he's not trying to make gold. He's trying to make something better. A harder alloy, a more consistent color, a predictable reaction. You see the difference. The room is thick with heat, but no one complains. Someone hands another man a vial of dark powder. He weighs it, nods, and writes the number down. They test it in a tiny flame. It flares blue, then green, then goes out. The man recording watches carefully. More copper, he murmurs. Less lead, another suggests. They argue quietly, then write both down. Historians still argue whether this was science yet. You watch them debate, test, record, adjust. You decide it is. You glance at a shelf filled with battered books. No fancy bindings here, just practical notes. Recipes for dyes, instructions for making better glass, how to make saltpeter more pure. One book's spine is cracked so badly it has been sewn with heavy thread. You see the labels in Latin and the local tongue mixed freely. No one cares about purity of language here, just clarity of meaning. You take it in slowly. The failed flasks, the cracked retorts, the piles of rejected alloys, the sweat on their faces, the stubborn, unblinking focus in their eyes. One man sees you watching. He holds up a piece of bright metal. Not gold, he says, voice dry as the desert. You nod. Better, he adds, quieter. You grin. He goes back to work. You glance at the door. Dawn is breaking for real now, leaking pale gray through the sooty windows. The world outside is waking. But in here, they never really slept. You turn slowly, letting the heat warm your back one last time. You nod to them. No one replies. They're too busy. You open the door and step out. The cold slaps you immediately, biting your ears and nose, stealing the last of the workshop's heat from your clothes. You pull your cloak tight, and you breathe. You watch the first rays of sun strike the rooftops, setting chimneys and wet cobbles alight with molten gold. Real gold. And you laugh quietly, because no one in that room would waste time trying to make it. They're too busy making everything else better. You take one last look at the town behind you. The smoke rising from chimneys, the tangled roofs, the crooked lanes, the quiet promise in every door. And you turn away, boots crunching on the frozen ground, because you're done for tonight, because you've seen enough, because there's always more to see. Always more waiting in the next street, the next workshop, the next whispered wonder. And now, as the last of the night exhales and dawn glows soft and certain across this tired old town, you let your eyes close. Feel the air still, the wind quiet at last. The cobbled streets grow silent beneath the hush of morning, their secrets kept for another night. The smoke from 100 hearths rises in gentle spirals, merging with low fog that curls around doorways and over stone walls like a blanket. Listen to the way the world softens now, edges blurring, voices fading to murmurs. The sharp scents of ink and iron, of old parchment and new dyes, drift away on a breeze grown gentle and slow. The fires gutter to embers, the forges cool, the presses fall quiet. Even the old alchemist's flame goes out with a hiss that sounds like a sigh. All those minds, stubborn and curious, weary now, resting at last. You breathe in, deeply, slowly. Let it out in one long, even exhale. Your shoulders loosen, your hands go slack, your eyes grow heavy. No need to worry about mysteries or debates tonight. No need to question whether it's magic or science. Just know they're both there, waiting for you to find them again. So settle back. Let the darkness dim even further behind your eyelids. Let the silence deepen until it feels like sleep itself. Because the wonders will still be there tomorrow, waiting for you, waiting to be seen. Good night.